coming. So honored to have everybody here today for actually My Pet Ram's first artist talk. The gallery's been open for about 3.5 years and haven't done one of these. So this is really beautiful and so honored to have Debbi show in the space and also to have Jack involved. Jack showed here about maybe 6 months or I don't know, maybe a year ago now. And it just feels really meaningful to have artists that have exhibited here kind of participate and come back around. Julia helped me curate a show this summer, so I feel like it's all starting to feel like really meaningful, and I'm grateful for that. So thanks for being here. Yeah, cheers.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Marcella. So I wrote the press release for this exhibition and the essay for the book. And
which is there if anybody wants to like pass it around or look at it.
Yeah.
Till I don't know if you want, you're welcome to pass it. People can look.
And I've known Debbi for 3 years?
3 years, yeah.
3 or 4 years?
Yeah, wow.
But really got to know her like more deeply through the process of writing about the work and sort of hearing the story of this body of work in particular. Which really blew me away and was emotional and special. And yeah, and I'm really proud that you asked me, and I was really, yeah, it was, thanks.
Thank you.
And I guess before we get into talking about anything technical or formal, can we talk about the why?
Yes. So Jack and I had a little brief convo yesterday. We didn't want to like get into the questions too much because we wanted to keep it off the cuff, fresh, at least for my responses. But we had a discussion about how there's a lot of like heaviness in this body of work for me personally, and like when we should talk about it. And we were like, let's just get it out there in the beginning, so we all are like on the same page moving forward. But yeah, so the title of the show is Fire Followers. And the concept behind that is it's a bit of a metaphor with when a forest fire happens. Afterwards, there's like a group of a mixture of wildlife and different things like weeds and bushes, trees, seeds that all happen to like arrive right after the fire. And those are the first stages for regrowth after a forest fire. And for me, I had experienced a big loss last year, which was the loss of my younger brother, Dan. He had been suffering with his mental health for a while and through some medical reasons had passed away. And so basically while I was dealing with this, like experiencing this loss, but also kind of like a long-term experience of, struggling with a sibling who has mental health difficulties in their life, experiencing that in your family and then also having that person pass away was kind of an extended trauma that I hadn't really known how to talk about because it wasn't really my life, it was someone else's life, but it heavily impacted me. And so it had been kind of in the work for a long time and showing up in different ways. But after he had passed, I had started making new work because I had this slew of exhibitions coming up, which was really an honor, but it was also kind of like, oh my God, I have so much going on, and like I'm flying back dealing with this stuff, very private things, like I don't want to talk too much about, but then at the same time, I have these 3 big shows coming up, which were, I had a solo show in Montreal, my very first solo show in Montreal in March, and then the week before that, I had a 2-person show at Kristen Tierney Open with Mark Sangbush, and then this show, Fire Followers, in the fall. So I was making all this work. In total, it was 24 paintings. While dealing with this heavy loss. So my brother passed away in July, and I started making the work in September, and I finished it like a matter of weeks before this show opened. So this is actually a third really of like a big body of work from this year, which is what that book Passing Around covers, which has all of the paintings from this year except for the small square ones. And it's front and back, which is cool. You can flip and see front and back. But yeah, so that's kind of the metaphor behind the show, and a lot of the work is really like bright, and we can talk about that. There's like a lot of brightness and happiness in these paintings, and I think that's for me, like grief is not something that just translates into like darkness. It also translates into like memories of positive times, or hope for new chapters, or hope for a better life than the one that someone was living in that wasn't ideal.
Yeah.
Which leads into do you want to talk about the title?
Memorialize Prism.
Which I love.
Yeah, and I think that the sort of variations in presence and absence in this work, the voids, right,
Mm-hmm.
represent that for me and for Debbi.
Mm-hmm.
But like talking to you about it, it really became evident, and I really see it mostly in this painting across the gallery. Marcella, could you open the doors on that? Thanks. Bud.
Conveniently staged there.
Yeah, and that's Interrupted Elf Cup, which just that open, like the flung open doors or like a flung open window, in the way that that's a metaphor for a broken heart, but also a way forward, because you can't just sit and stew in your grief forever. Immediately after something like that happens, you have to sit with it and sit in your pain. But then how do you move forward? And I really love just how ornamental the framing on this is, because it is this like devastated open space, but surrounded by life and joy and regrowth.
Yeah, so like I love that you said that. The title for the book, which is like kind of became this title for the whole year's body of work, Memorials Prism. I think the sentence that I kind of was like going through Jack's writing, and I was like, I'm obsessed with this sentence. Can I title the book after this? And I think the sentence was something like, the holes in these paintings act both as a memorial and a prism. Because I had talked about the holes becoming this like metaphor for loss, and how when you take away something, it is a loss. There's something that wasn't there, but it also like allows you to see everything around it more, which can be metaphors for family or just memories, or the preciousness of life, of being alive. And also I love the memorial part of it, but then the prism being like someone who's clearly obsessed with color and the way things like refract outward, and that grief does show up in these like rainbow of different ways. I thought was really accurate and beautiful. And also my brother had been very sick, and so it was kind of difficult to understand like a tragic event that was also kind of a gift for him to be able to have peace. So it was complicated, and it was I thought a really elegant title.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's the foundation we can start with.
Yeah. And I guess, can we talk about stretchers?
We can talk about stretchers. Yes.
So the stretchers initially come out of quilt blocks, correct?
Yes. So for maybe 2 years, 3 years now, I've been looking at quilting blocks. So for those that don't know what that is, a quilting block is the element that repeats in a quilt. So an example would be like a brick in a wall. So like they add up to form the whole quilt. And I got really interested in quilting blocks because they are, as someone who's clearly interested in math and geometry, they're like a really beautiful way to endlessly play with a square. Mostly squares, not always, but most of the time. And also the history of quilting is interesting to me. But yeah, so a lot of the shapes come from quilting blocks. Not all of them in this show. Some of them come from like moments in architecture I'm interested in. Some of them come from like playing with just, in my digital programs, like what if I twisted it this way? What if I stacked it up? What if I like made this have 10 angles or 10 sides instead of 8 sides? Like just kind of playing and fiddling and figuring out what feels right.
Well, and you plan meticulously.
I do. I have a weird relationship with planning, where I plan a lot and then I'm very open to change. So and I only plan one part of my process at a time, which I think is nice because it allows me to change my mind or to be open to things, especially because I do use a good bit of digital things. I don't want to feel like it's just like a print of a digital tool.
Right.
I want it to feel like it's a mixture.
So where can you point to chance in the work?
There's a lot of chance. Yeah, there's a couple seats if anyone wants to sit. Welcome. Okay, so the question was, where can I point to chance? There's a lot of chance. The most obvious one is the dye. So a little background on like the general way that I make these. I start with the stretcher design, which we just talked about, kind of some loose references for where the shapes come from. And I started using a digital program called Fusion 360, which I really like, which allows me to be able to like mock up the actual shape digitally. I can spin it around in 3D and like fold it in and import things. That's really fun. And then from there I can start building it, which is all done by me and like very old school stretcher making. And we'll see if that continues forever because it's a lot of work. But at this point it feels like something, I'm still after something with that. And then I lay out big sheets of canvas and I start dyeing. So that's where I think a lot of the chance, I mean there's moments, but some of the big ones. So I have this giant brush that I'm very fond of, and I work on the ground with it, and I like pour dye, I'm moving it around, and I'm kind of making this like off the cuff painting, and I don't really know where it's going. You can see it in this one, like the brush right there. There's like a brush mark. You can see it in this one too, like up here. And then sometimes like with this one, I'm putting pieces of tape down on the canvas and then pulling it up. But that also leads into more chance, which is after I've washed and dried the canvas, I have to decide how to cut it up. So because it's not just stretching over one shape, this is a bunch of canvases put together. And so I can kind of see, like as I'm laying the canvas down, where it's going to end up, but there is a lot of chance. There's kind of chance throughout, but that's the big middle part.
When you approach shape, how do you think about shape and personality, or like shape and what you're trying to say?
With the canvases?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I feel like I want them to not be too stiff. So like this one is really locked in because it's, you know, it's locked in on the outside, it's locked in on the inside, but there is a lot of different shapes, and there's this kind of moment of like breaking through of the space in the middle that's important to me. Also how they sit on the wall. So this one has a bit of a like angling out. I think the shadows also give personality. The ones that move over here that you can see, they have definitely some, there's something there too.
And then this body of work is this the first time you've painted both sides?
Yes. So there's a few exciting things in this series for this particular show, because we were talking about how there's 3 shows this year. For this particular grouping, one of the new things is that for these 2 hinged paintings, I have painted both sides of them. Some other new things are that this is the first time I've had a hinged painting break open into 2 pieces, like a portal or a door. And then for the pink one here, this is the first time I've had a backwards canvas. So the actual like true face of it is against the wall. And then when it closes, it has a moment where you can see some of the front, but otherwise it lives in this backward state.
Right, and the stretcher designs themselves are like built into the work and kind of do this like total work of art thing.
Yes.
Which is reflective of your influences as well.
And my education.
Yeah.
I studied both painting and sculpture, so I did my undergrad in painting and installation, and my master's in sculpture. I think that like no matter what I had done, I probably would have ended up in a weird intersection of these things, but I do think that in some ways studying sculpture brought me back to painting, because I always make a matrix reference of the red pill, which is like once I took the red pill of sculpture, I couldn't unsee sculpture and everything. But I also consider myself a painter. I love painting. Like I'm not leaving it anytime soon. But I love painting so much that I'm also interested in the whole object of painting being like the bones of it as well as the skin. Which I know a lot of painters don't feel that way, but that's my own weird brain.
No, I love it. I love the a sort of stair-step design
Mm-hmm.
in Interrupted Elf Cup, and then also this like weird M/H shape that's happening in Fireweed.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and how they both really echo like Art Nouveau and Art Deco
Mm-hmm.
sensibilities.
Yeah, I think that comes from especially stained glass. I was looking at a lot of stained glass this year, which I think had to do with like my long-term interest in architecture, and then thinking about, okay, what is like a sacred space? I'm not a religious person, but like what is a sacred space as someone who works really spatially? And I ended up thinking at a lot of places of faith, and a lot of those spaces have stained glass. And so I was like getting deep into stained glass and looking at like the way that light goes through it, which also as a color nerd is like, and then, so that, and then, you know, it's kind of hard to look at stained glass and not stumble upon Art Nouveau.
Yeah.
There's just so much in there, which is like another thing in this body of work is this line that has sort of been there before, but has really taken off. And I think that is me just looking at a lot of stained glass and Art Nouveau and seeing that, like the lead work, and being really interested in that as a visual element, and then seeing where it could take me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we talk about your childhood and also your understanding of art history
We can.
as it's framed by your upbringing, sort of?
Yes, we can. So I'm from Washington State. So maybe one other Washington State person in here, represent. Pretty far away from here.
Yeah.
I came here for grad school, so I've been here like 10 years.
And you grew up on an island.
And I grew up on an island with a bridge. It's the one island with a bridge, so you can get to it. We did not leave it very often, even though there was a bridge. But yeah, I grew up in kind of like a homesteading effort with my family, my mom's extended family. Yeah, there was definitely, my dad is a person of faith, most of my family is, and they made the decision to homeschool us and do like home church and things like that. Didn't really stick for me, but
it was all like very homespun.
Very home,
Yeah.
yeah, very much about the home, and like it wasn't necessarily my nuclear family. Like my mom's whole family was on this large property, and so there was a lot of kids running around, neighbors. So it was kind of a community situation. But I spent a lot of time looking at my dad making things, which I really loved, and we talked about this briefly before, but it's interesting because there was a bit of a gender split in my family. Even though there was like a lot of openness and encouragement, there was definitely like a split for activities. And so like both my grandmothers were seamstresses, and I had a lot of handmade clothes. My dad and my brothers were, you know, building parts of our house and like shops and doing construction. And I was often looking at that side and being like, that looks really fun, but like I'm over here in the kitchen team.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, I don't know, I feel like I learned a lot from both sides, but it did give me kind of a gendered lens on making that has stuck with me. And as I've become, you know, did a degree in sculpture, looking back at like my brothers not doing sculpture or any kind of woodworking was interesting. And like the experience of not like someone encouraging you to do something but wanting to do it, and then in some ways idealizing or romanticizing it, I think has definitely pushed me towards like, you know, loving the woodworking of these, and then also not having the tools and like kind of always learning the wrong way.
Yeah.
But I'm not entirely sure how that comes into the work, but I think it's in there somehow.
And then like when did you meet your art teacher?
My high school art teacher?
Yeah. I just really like that story.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just sent him a book actually, which is nice. We reconnected a bit. So because I was homeschooled, I didn't have, I'd done like a little bit of classes here and there in art, but I hadn't really done any like major things. But there was art festivals every summer, so I would like make these paintings and submit them to the art festival, and I think I won like a prize one year, and I was really proud of myself. And by the time I got to high school, I was really nervous. I'd been homeschooled, so so I was like, am I gonna fit in? And very excited for art class. And the art teacher, it happened to be his first year teaching there. He'd been waiting like years to teach. He'd been teaching middle school level. And he went down like the roll call of students, and he got to my name. My full name is Deborah. And he was like, which one of you is Deborah? And I was so embarrassed because I thought I'd already done something wrong. And he was like, see me after class. And then he after class, he was like, you know, I've been watching you paint for like years at these art festivals, and I think you're supposed to be an oil painter. And so he like took it upon himself to like bring me his personal oil paints, and like had one of the woodshop kids make me like a personal easel, and I had my own set up like in the art class for all through high school. And he encouraged me to get into college and to like go to art school. Which I think he's crying a little bit that I'm using acrylic paint, but I'm gonna switch back soon, so that's my plan.
One of my other favorite things you talked about in our interview, I guess, is how you feel like there are two different personalities that operate in the work, and there's like one person that sets up a problem,
Yes.
and then the other
Yes.
Debbie that has to solve it.
Yes.
And I really like that
Yeah.
dichotomy.
Yeah, so a lot of these questions are coming from like, because we had a really lovely long studio visit before Jack wrote the essay for the book. But yeah, I definitely feel like I play a lot of games with myself, and I have rules, and I can be a little bit neurotic, and so I need that. Like that's one of the reasons I use dye, is I'm like, I will control everything if you let me, and it's like an illusion because you can't control anything really, it's all just attempts. And it's a nice way to like, says a real neurotic person, but it's a nice way to like have, I don't know, just to have like different people allowed to exist and not be in conflict. So I'll be like, okay, right now I am a messy abstract painter with dye working on the ground, and that's all that matters, and it's really freeing. And then the next day I am like back to my tight, clean painting self who's like, what have you done? And is trying to like figure out some kind of like way to resolve it. Yeah, and similar with the stretchers, like I make the stretchers, and people don't believe me when I say this, but I have no idea what I'm gonna paint. I have no idea what the color is gonna be when I make them. I just am like really convinced and like compelled by the shape. So I make the shape, and I have them all like in my program set up now, and I'm like looking at them all. Like sometimes I'll even throw them up into like a room, like on a wall, and see how they feel. And then once they're all actually truly made, then I start the dyeing and then the painting. But yeah, so it really is different people kind of in my brain.
Yeah. Yes. How, with the hinged paintings, how has that changed like the internal design elements?
Yeah, so the hinge paintings they're kind of slippery, and I like that about them. I actually just saw a really great show of, if anyone is looking for some art shows to see, Katsumi Nakai just opened uptown, and it's this amazing Japanese artist who had spent maybe like 2 decades of his life in Italy, in Milan. But he's like a master of hinge paintings. I've been making these hinge paintings for maybe 2 or 3 years now, and they mean a lot to me. I'm really excited about them, especially just like looking at the art canon and like where it's gone, where it's going, and being a woman and like looking at the history and not always seeing myself super in it. It's really nice to feel like I'm just able to literally break free and like make things that move. And I found his work like last week, and I just was like blown away. I bought the book and everything. But he talks a lot about freedom, and him being like Japanese but living in Milan and not speaking Italian at all for his entire life, which is insane to me. But like his concept was just like, you know, these don't really have a front. They can go anywhere, and they're kind of like breaking these rules. And like, is anything actually like static? Things are always kind of moving, and even I guess that's where I like get kind of stuck with painting with the sculpture brain, is I'm like, yeah, but you can't see the back of it, so there's always something hiding. I don't know. I get like really stuck on these questions like of physics and everything. But yeah, so the hinges are important to me. I want to do more of them.
Yeah.
And I think that they're.
Do you feel like it's like the hinge as a development was driven by compulsion to be able to like look at the back of the painting?
Definitely, yeah. That's where it started. It's beyond that now. It's definitely beyond that. I mean, it was like a conversation with my partner, Sage. And I was trying to make this stretcher, and I could not. I was like, I just feel like it needs to like come out into space or whatever. And he was like, you know about hinges, right? And I was like, what? Like, I couldn't.
Yeah.
I couldn't possibly.
You ever seen a door?
Yeah. Yeah. It was actually for Kate, for a show I had with Kate. I was in that stage making work. Yeah.
What do you think the biggest like revelation making this body of work was for you?
That's a good question.
Was there like an aha moment?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of risks in this series. So like working on the backs of the painting for both of these, I don't know, that was a risk. Hanging a painting backwards. This painting is psychotic and everybody loves it. I'm so glad, but it's it was really difficult to make. I don't know. I think for me it was like Marcella was really encouraging and was kind of like, this is your show, go crazy. And that was like the permission I needed. So I made a lot of things that I was like, these could totally flop. Like I was mentioning the backs, this like shape that has all these holes that I was like, can I even fabricate something by hand 16 times and have it look reasonably like the same? And stretching is the same way, like the way you do the folds. If they're not perfect, once you start gessoing, it gets like really sticky. So there's a lot of risk taking, and I feel like that I think paid off.
Yeah.
And the line work, definitely the line work. Like
Right,
I feel
because
like
you
that's
can't mess up, right?
I mean, I had
Or-
a few extras, but yeah. But yeah, and the line. Oh, you mean with the line work?
Yeah.
Yeah. With the line work, so that's something else I should mention is that, like, I actually don't use any tape for my paintings. The exception being the border, and this one I used it right here, which I also considered a border. But everywhere else, it's all done just with a brush and either pencil or chalk, like drawn, and then I'm tracing and layering. And that's important to me because I don't know. I really like to have like my hand be apparent in the work. Yeah, I think because there is so much sculpture in the actual painting, I want it to feel like I'm painting, not like taping and cutting and all that stuff. And also, I kind of need to see it as I go. Every layer that I paint is, I don't know, it's shaping a little bit because there's no tape. So like this might start as a more wonky angle, and then I'm slowly building it up and refining it as I go. Yeah.
How important, so every piece in the show is named after either like a bird
Yes.
or a plant.
Yeah.
How important do you think their personalities were to the work formally?
Yeah, so maybe like halfway through the series, maybe a little less than that, I was starting, because it took so long to fabricate all these stretchers, and I did have a deadline, like I had deadlines all year, and so I was like, I gotta start thinking about all these different things, and so I started thinking like, what is the show title gonna be? And I was like, well, what are you even doing in here? Which I feel like is how artists often work. It's kind of like a frenzy, but that was when I was like, oh, you're talking about grief, you've been talking about it for a while. And I think at that point I started researching, and also we had started having conversations about the work, and I started researching like these different agents of change that come after a wildfire. So this one's called indigo bunting, which is this really cute little blue bird.
Very cute.
And it helps spread the seeds. And so I think there was like, as I was sketching them out, and I use, for my sketching process, I'll make maybe like 3 to like 6, maybe more, little sketches on paper that are just pencil on paper. And then I will float them digitally in Illustrator over a photo of the canvas, and I'm kind of moving them around and pulling shapes forward and backwards. And that like is important to me because I really like world building or having like the paint come off the canvas. So like there's never, with the exception of this one, like there's never a shape really that goes super up to the edge. It's always like a crop of a drawing or an image. And so the ability to float all those sketches together like gives me a more organic feel. But yeah, so it was important, I guess, to answer your question. It was important, but it wasn't like, I feel like with everything I do, I'm very open to things changing or being like, that wasn't right, or I didn't get that quite right, I'm gonna like zoom out. Like with this one, I feel like I didn't, it's called Funaria, and it's this like really lovely plant that kind of like snakes upward.
It has all these little like bulbous little
these really
pod
cute,
things that happen in sequence.
Yeah, and this one I changed my mind a lot on it, and I couldn't actually figure out which, what to name it, and then I named it after I was done, and it's crazy because it's like the perfect fit for it. So some of them
Totally
did
makes
happen
sense.
that way, like after the fact.
I love that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Oh.
I really like that though.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a bit about the writing process?
Yeah.
So Jack is also a really talented artist, if anyone doesn't know.
Thanks.
And he graciously wrote the essay for the book. Yeah, I think I was curious to know how, like as a writer, when you approach writing about work, how does being an artist affect that? Because a lot of people that write about work don't make, or that show work don't make work.
I love it because I hate writing about my own work. It is like the most painfully embarrassing experience that I can imagine. And so when, I don't know, anytime anybody asks me to do it, I feel immensely honored. And when you asked me, I was surprised. I guess I'm surprised anytime I get asked, just because, you know, I don't know.
But you write a lot. He writes very well.
But I always just like, I want to provide context and like love and understand the work.
Mm-hmm.
That's the main thing, I think. And it's also like a beautiful opportunity to get to know somebody and just like grow your community in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I've known you for 3 years or whatever, but the conversation we had that night in your studio, like I feel like I really understood you as a person, and we cried, and it was really nice.
He knows all my secrets now.
Yeah. But yeah, it's like, I just love it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it also has affected my work. Like I am currently planning a bunch of new paintings, and
Cool.
I have historically never planned a painting. So, thanks, Debbie.
Sorry. I love that. Should we ask anybody else has questions?
Yeah.
Do you want to?
I have a question, just
Yes.
fresh off the heels of that.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I had lots of thoughts and trying to form
Yeah.
discrete questions was the challenge. You talk about rules
Yes. Yeah.
and breaking rules, and then planning, pre-planning, right? And the hinged paintings are a beautiful painting on the other side is a great sort of evolution. If I remember correctly, somewhere on Instagram through the gallery, I think I've seen one of these paintings that's hung face out, right?
That one. Yeah.
There's one that, but it's hanging face out now, but it was photographed in reverse.
Oh, well, so all of them are photographed on the back as well.
Okay.
In the book, you can like flip and see the backs.
Okay,
Yeah.
because my question was,
Yeah.
do you believe that, like, you just don't know until that moment whether you're going to exhibit it
Which
face
way?
out or not, and
Yeah.
how many of these went through, like,
Yeah.
back and forth?
Yeah. I feel like you're in my brain right now. Because I'm like, now I'm thinking about the next stuff. You know, you're always like, the show is always a little behind. And I'm really interested in the backs of paintings. I mean, I feel like I have to apologize for some reason, but I'm trying to get past that. I don't know. I just think they're really interesting. I think it's like a built-in frame. Like I sound totally insane saying
I don't
this,
think
but
so.
it's like, we have made a decision to paint on the front of it, but then like there's this whole thing on the back that is really interesting to me, and that can like add shadows, and like with these two that paint on the back, like the shadows are like my favorite part of that painting is when it's open. I don't know, it's how my brain works. But to answer your question, I haven't really shown any truly backwards, except for this one, which was a plan to show it that way. But I've like been photographing the backs for a while, which is not cheap to do, 2 photographs per painting.
Yeah.
I have been doing it for, I mean, that's why I have the material for this book. I've been doing it for like, I don't know, almost 2 years, because I just have this attachment to the backs. So I think some of the new works I'm currently like planning will have maybe a true like back hanging one, or like a folding open to one. Yeah.
I'm not sure I have the question part for me. Maybe it's more of a comment.
Yeah.
But I just keep thinking about like the altar pieces
Mm-hmm.
and how in like Catholic churches, like a lot of times they would be kept closed for like almost the
Yeah.
entire year.
Yeah.
And some of the most famous ones are also, it's like black, like a braille on the front, and then it'll have the color inside. But like how it only be exposed as part of the community coming in and having a parade, like a ceremony and some sort of marking of like a feast day or celebration.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that a lot when you're talking about like pain and grieving, and how it's also kind of like a temporal like
Yeah.
mindfuck and
Yeah.
like a pain that has been existing, and then there's just like these moments with it. So I don't know. So I guess just bringing that's really reading to me as you're speaking, and kind of time element
Yeah.
implied in these.
Yeah, it's kind of like flowers, opening up different
Yeah.
times a day, or like I know some of the like indigenous masks, they'll have them like open, but they're actually not supposed to be open, because it's like sacred to keep them closed except for ceremonial purposes. I don't know if I have like anything like that yet with my work, where I like want it only open at certain points, but I could see that happening at some point, like a more special like secret viewing of like an inner pocket, like a third layer or something.
Well, I guess
Yeah.
I feel like it's calling to your experience
Yeah.
as an artist in your studio, where you're like, well, I'm seeing it in this other
Yeah.
totality, and
Yeah.
how and when can I share that?
Yeah. And that was like with the book too, having being able to flip and see the back of the painting. For me, it was like, I love that I can have this book and people can walk around, because normally like people walk around and they're like, that must be a crazy back of that painting, and I'm like, oh, it is. and I can't like show it. I mean, I could take it off, and I have, but I'm aging out of that a little bit. So I'm on my best behavior. Yeah.
I keep looking at like the edges of the canvas in the back, because going back to what you're talking about, like finishing things to a certain extent, like they have like the most sort of like uneven. I mean, they're very clean like lines, but there's like you like release some control, and then you let them like have the vocabulary of like almost like a upholstered like chair or something, just like cinched back. Like moving forward with the backward paintings, do you think you'd like sort of shift the like way that the back reads as a back with stuff like that, and like work with like something that doesn't need like fabrics in front of like a painting, or is that part of the like joy or like the rebellion of it, that it's like actually has some of that like crumpledness, sort of like it's like truly not supposed to be seen?
It's a great question, and I might go on a tangent here about it, because it's an important question to me. So like on one hand of that question, like I love canvas, so like that's the answer to that. Like I love canvas, and it can be a different fabric, but I love stretch paintings. And I think because I am pushing painting like so far out of like traditional painting, it's important for me to have the language of that in this weird way. So that isn't going to go anywhere, even though that Japanese artist I was mentioning, he entirely used plywood, and I love the thinness of it, and I'm looking at different thinnesses to play with. But I still want to keep that language, which goes into like also the whole like where the canon is right now and how it's opening up, and like in some ways, like I don't know if I could have made these paintings like and had the people want to talk about them like even 20 years ago. I'm not sure, but we are at a time where we're really open to craft and talking about the history of women's work in contemporary painting, and that stuff to me is super important, because like I didn't grow up looking at fine art at all. I looked at quilts and sewing, and clothing, and then like, you know, my dad building our house, so that kind of thing. But yeah, for the finishing part of your question, so like the staples and the fray and stuff, that's something I'm currently thinking about for new work too. I've been looking at upholstery, like there's different ways to seal furniture, so I was like looking at like those, or like I have done some welding in grad school, so I was like I might get back into welding a little bit. Who knows? I'm still thinking that through. I'm doing a residency in the
With
spring.
Soon,
What?
right? Soon.
Soon, yeah. Doing Stoveworks for February and March, and they have a huge like metal and wood shop. So, but yeah, I don't know. We'll see. I'm like, it's an interesting question. I like the looseness of it. I don't want to lose the language of painting, but I do think there's like room to grow. Yeah.
We were talking briefly before you started this about your background in sewing and making clothing and understanding how to tailor and make your pants. And I'm blown away that this was made in 3 months. Is that correct?
4 or 5, yeah.
I can't even get over it. And so I wonder if you could talk about how your knowledge and background in sewing and working with fabric allowed you and helped you create this, because I feel like you can't start from square one
Yeah.
crafting these, like,
Yeah.
you know, like in
Yes.
4 months.
Yeah. Well, so I have I don't have any formal background in like sewing or anything like that, but I do have like a love of it, and I've been just learning it as I go. And I like never have a huge budget, but I have like high taste, I guess. So I'm always like looking at things that are really expensive, and I'm like, I could probably make a shitty version of that for this show or something. So I've been sewing for a long time, maybe like 5 years or something. And Sage, my partner, him and I in 2020, right after we met, we briefly had this like tie-dye business thing, which was a very like cool thing in 2020 to do. Maybe not in 2021 when we stopped, but we had like a great run. And when we stopped, we had like, you know, things to go back to, but we had these huge buckets of dye from our like super cool Colorado Grateful Dyes, great name, supplier. And so we had all these buckets of dye, and I was like looking at it, and I was, you know, we talked about chance, and like I felt like my work was getting really tight, and I was like feeling like I was controlling it too much, and I was like, I need something to shake it up. I need something to push against I can't control. And that was when I was like, I'm gonna use this dye, and I started just playing with it. So I feel like the dye I'm really comfortable with, and I'm actually like really excited for the next series. I want to like explore that more. But yeah, the dye is like comforting. I know how it's gonna turn out. There is some chance, but I know like the realm of chance it's gonna be. I know like roughly when I put the color down what color it's gonna turn into. But yeah, I don't know. It was a crazy sprint. I think it was not great for my health overall. So I'm trying to like, yeah, it shouldn't have been. Marcella gave me a lot of time, but just the other shows popped up. So
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
thanks. Yeah. Any other questions? Do you have any more questions?
What's your favorite color?
Blue. Probably blue. I mean, I don't know. I feel like so my friend Paz, she always tells me I'm like the blue queen because I wear a lot of blue. I love blue. I do feel like it's the relationship between the colors, to be honest, to be a little meta about it. Yeah.
Context.
Yeah.
Context is everything.
Yeah, so like can't blue without orange.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your favorite color?
Blue.
I knew that going into this. I like them all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any more questions? Good?
This is kind of
Chris?
pretty specific, but like the line work that goes over into these different frames on this
Yeah.
piece here.
Yeah.
I don't know if you could talk in a little bit more detail about like maybe your decision making with like breaking those, you know,
This,
those barriers up with those lines
Yeah.
that kind of loop over. I thought that
Yeah.
was like a really nice, interesting decision on that one.
Yeah, that is something I've been doing on and off in my paintings for a while, and I don't know if I have I think when I answered it in the past, like why I'm doing it, I think I'm doing it because it's like a cadence, like poetry. So I talk about that a lot with like the abstract language of like my actual things I'm painting. Like, you know, they come from nature, they come from my own weird lexicon of like built up shapes and characters, but they often, like, the negative space is really important, and like the same way like a poem is not supposed to be a short story, there's like a cadence and a feeling, and I think having some kind of line work kind of guides you through the painting, and then also having it be broken up like that, I don't know, it just feels like it suddenly, it's a lot more complicated than you thought. It's not just these like windows, it's like, no, there's anything could happen, like things are, we don't know where that goes, and maybe we thought this was gonna, you know, stay in here, but then it just like, yeah, I don't know, I like that, like it's almost punk in a weird way.
Yeah, I mean it's very musical or poetic,
Yeah.
like you were saying, like
Yeah.
the stanzas, and then
Yeah.
like there's a rhythm, there's
Yeah.
like you're establishing a boundary but then breaking
Yes.
it, which is going back to
Yes, I come from a really musical family, and my dad's side is like classical musicians and like nothing but opera and classical music in the home, and then my mom's side is like diehard country people, and so there's kind of a mashup of that too. Yeah. Yeah.
Sort of a follow-up question. First of all, I do love those lines going through, and I also love that you only did it in a few areas. It's so restrained. Like I feel like if I hadn't made this, which would never have happened, but if I had and I had discovered that line, I'd want to do it everywhere. Like,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
I guess my question is, how, when you're painting these, how much of this, I know you don't want to figure out the piece and how it's
Yeah.
being painted and all of it at once, but how much do you commit digitally to these decisions?
Yeah.
And then how much are you figuring it out sort of like piece by piece
Yeah.
on the work?
Yeah, so for the painting, like there's a lot of like non-committing to the next steps, but when it gets to the painting stage, that's kind of when I'm like, all right, this is like no take-backs sort of thing, especially because the dye, like if I go over onto the dye and I'm not using tape, like if I go over it, then it's like, well, now I have to paint a shape there. And sometimes that happens where I'll be like, I didn't intend that, but I messed up a little, so we're gonna have a fun little shape over here, figure out how to make it work. But for the most part now, I have all these sketches, I'm putting them together. It takes me forever to decide what the painting's gonna be.
Yeah.
Like we did a few of us in here did a residency together, and I was like, a whole week for like 3 sketches. I just couldn't figure them out. But once I figure them out, I'm pretty confident in them, and then I'll use like a projector and kind of like loosely sketch them in. And then I'm like mixing color, and sometimes they're like pretty similar to like the digital sketch. Sometimes they're totally different. So it really depends. Like the piece back there that opens up, interrupted elf cup, that one was brutal. Like I made a digital sketch, I changed it like 3 times, I cried a couple times, and then I made a totally different like palette for it. So it looks nothing like the digital sketch, and I think that's like super important to me, that it never is just a reproduced thing, reproduction. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? This is a great view right here.
Yeah.
Would you ever think of using stained glass? Making a
I would
piece?
love to. I would love to use stained glass, and I would love to use ceramics, and more metals. Yeah, I'm hoping if anybody knows any residencies that are open to teaching you. Yeah. Yeah, I would love to use stained glass. I think the dye is like kind of what I've seen how people use glazing. It's like you kind of know what you're doing, and it's like roughly what you put down, but then after it's fired, it's sealed. You can't do anything else, and it looks off the cuff. And I would love to do that with ceramics and stained glass. Yeah. Thanks, you guys.
Yep.
Thank you.